Hi, I'm Spencer Grendall, and welcome to the Spencer Grendall Show. We have a very exciting show for you today. We are returning to a theme of a past show, an archaeological show, and Randy Kopang, our guest today, and I explored in our past show a mystery about huge blocks in a temple in Baalbek in Lebanon. And we went on the web and we looked through all the museums on the web and we downloaded pictures from the web and we just worked very hard and got a lot of stuff. And it was a mystery because we have these large stones, and how did this happen? These are bigger than stones in Egypt, but similar in certain ways and yet different. And Randy got so excited that he bought a ticket to Lebanon, took a cameraman, and hightailed it there. Not only go to Lebanon, he went to Egypt. So we have a two-part show, Anomalies to the Temple of the Sun. And what we mean by anomalies here is unusual things that we, with modern science, or with what we now know about ancient science, cannot explain how certain things happened. That there are like clues to a greater mystery. Now, Randy, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Spencer.
And tell us about this incredible journey. How did you get excited and take off to Lebanon?
Well, yes, indeed. In our previous program, which was exactly a year ago, almost exactly a year ago, I felt that actually, to clarify a point, we did attempt to dig up as much information on the site of Baalbek specifically as we could on the web. And we found quite a bit of, shall we say, more mundane perceptions of what the site represents, but we found very little evidence and not very much photographic evidence, shall we say, especially in that sense, that showed exactly what has been described in a number of books that have come out, that are books devoted to revisionist history. Well, there's a number of people, and more of them all the time, writing books and doing a lot of very good research that have felt that the perceptions of the past as held by the Orthodox academia have basically understated a lot of artifacts that are there throughout the world, and kind of arbitrarily decided that they were insignificant, and so therefore they didn't include them in their overview of what history suggests as far as perhaps technological developments in the ancient past, and then how these artifacts played a role in both the cultural and spiritual lives of the people of the past. And what happened with me was I got enamored with this one particular site, especially this one at Baalbek, because I noticed that there wasn't a lot of photographic evidence that was described in some of these books, such as by Zacharias Sitchin in his book, another guy named Alan Alford.
Right. Well, I want one thing before we jump to Lebanon. Now, when you say revision, let me say, in other words, you say, what is the motivation? You're saying that certain historical writers are now kind of like
they're breaking the
skipping
mold
over and not really analyzing this evidence. Is there a motivation why they wouldn't want to face this evidence head on?
The Orthodox people, you mean? Well, in terms of the new authors, they're feeling that the old mold of historical reckoning has to be broken, the mold of that, and because basically it has developed into a dogmatic bias in terms of how to analyze and interpret history. So these new people on the scene are just carrying on in the tradition of basically reevaluating what we know as people about the human family, the history of the human family, basically. And this has always been done. There's no reason to believe that just because a history has been kind of like institutionalized in the way that it's being taught, that we should take it for face value, that there's nothing more to determine. That's hardly the case.
Yes.
And so that's why there's so many people going back into the sites themselves, in actual fact by visitation, and looking around and seeing if there's something there to develop new ideas around. And so that's especially the case at Baalbek. And I'm going to show you some films that we took.
Well, tell us about your journey, then we'll show the film. Now, you took off from LAX. How'd you get there?
Yeah, we flew actually directly to Lebanon. Baalbek is in Lebanon. It's in north central Lebanon in the Bekaa Valley. And we had no trouble going there.
And you went with a cameraman, and you brought back some video.
Yeah.
You want to give any background on this video, or we want to look at it and have you talk over it? How do you want to work this?
Well, what I thought I'd do was, in terms of furthering my research as background material for this film clip we will show, I will perhaps read or elaborate some ideas about the history of the site to show that there is there is a degree of continuity with respect to the history that's written about the site and the anomalies that we're going to describe. And primarily that focuses on the two walls of a temple there, which was built by the Romans, beginning around, I believe it was begun in around 60 BC and continued to be built for approximately 300 years. It was never completely a fully realized architectural construction. But the remarkable thing, as you see right here, these blocks in the middle, the Romans built upon these blocks, the large ones there. And you can see that the lack of continuity in the foundation stones of this wall. Very clearly, it was as if the smaller blocks at the far right and at the top were added on.
Yes, you can see that very clearly.
Now, the history of these blocks that you see go back into time immemorial. And as a matter of fact, I'll read from a book written by the curator of this site for 37 years, named Michael Aloof. He says that the tradition states that the fortress of Baalbek, this is not the fortress, this is the temple, known as the Temple of Jupiter, built by the Romans generally, that's what it's known as. But the tradition states in the town, in the area, in Lebanon, that the fortress at Baalbek, which is nearby on Mount Lebanon, is the most ancient building in the world and was built by Cain, son of Adam, in the year 133 of the creation.
Wow.
And then another...
Now this is another example here of the above is the Romans, and the kind of the rough stuff is the older, going back to the time of Cain.
Well,
that's pretty far back.
That's what the tradition says.
I mean, that's the Adam and Eve. Of course, I don't believe that.
And the revisionist historians are going back and saying, let's listen to these traditions and give some serious consideration to why these people say these things, and not presume that they've just made it up or created a myth for the sake of creating one, right?
Now, is this that big? The big
these blocks in
that one's
the ones on the very top, right? They're known as the trilithon, and they weigh over 1,100 tons. So the remarkable anomaly is that how these could have been moved.
1,100 tons, one block.
Precisely. You can see how precise they're mounted there.
Look at that stuff. That's amazing.
Exactly. Now the point I'm trying to make here is that the history shows that into time immemorial, this site has been recognized as, in one way or another, in one form or another, being constructed in this site. And it goes back actually into the whole story of Genesis. So there's a man who's still alive, whose name is Christian O'Brien, who's been basically doing a process of analysis both in terms of etymology and philology of the ancient texts left by the Sumerians and the Babylonians and the Akkadians, and pre-biblical texts by the Hebrews, and coming to the conclusion that the history that's accounted in all these ancient texts is basically a history that includes this site, but not the temple that's built above these giant blocks.
Not this Roman addition.
No.
That's being pointed out by the finger. That's the Roman addition up there.
Right. That's relatively modern. In fact, the parts that you're seeing now were actually a reassemblage of the blocks actually after it was torn down by the Arabs, and they rebuilt it to fortify it and use it as a fortress. But these blocks here are totally anomalous and inconsistent with the apparent building that you see there on the left now. And so we're trying to evaluate that in terms of a history that's not academically acceptable. It's outside the parameter of an ancient view that anomalous things, namely the movement of such blocks. I mean, we've looked into this to the degree of talking with engineers and crane operators that move large blocks to tell you that you expected primitive people to do this all by hand, it would have been virtually impossible, because there's no way you can maneuver blocks that weigh hundreds and hundreds of tons. I mean, it's staggering just to imagine how much these things weigh. But as you can see here, me coming through this doorway, now this is on...
How far were they from the site where they were quarried?
The quarry where they believe most of the blocks that you see everywhere, both used by the Romans and these, come approximately a mile away only. But nonetheless, we're talking at a time wherein they didn't have the wheel, right? This predates that kind of technology by actually thousands of years. So people like Christian O'Brien are going back in there into the history of the Sumerians, and identifying localities, namely this very region that can be very undoubtedly identified with the story of Genesis and the story as told by Enoch in the book of Enoch, one of the books of the Old Testament left out of the Old Testament. And you could identify that this site of Baalbek actually was a settlement area within what came to be known as the Garden of Eden region of the Middle East. And what Christian O'Brien has done is shown that Baalbek was a site...
That's you standing on that rock,
That's
right?
in front of me. That's proportional. You can see those blocks there are about 14 feet tall.
Wow.
But you can see that they're truly monumental, and as they say, cyclopean. And there's a lot of them as well. There's not just a few of them. So whoever designed this decided arbitrarily that there was no problem with doing it, and maybe in terms of economy or who knows what the purpose was for the original construction, although there is a hypothesis, but we don't have time to go into that. Now, right now, we're viewing right in the center there. You can see some columns. The far distance, that's the temple where we just were. This is the quarry where these blocks came from. Now, this block right here is the largest of all blocks.
Look at that block.
Yeah, the estimate weight of that one is
why is it just sticking there? They get interrupted in their building?
Perhaps 1,500 tons.
Whoa, here come the Pleiadians to attack you.
Yeah, now in two books that I have on this site, it actually states, this is not a revisionist supposition, that there was a place for it at the site, and there was every intention of moving it over there, but for whatever unknown reason they did not. So it's not a hypothetical that this block was going to be used as such. They actually say that in the histories, that it was very likely to be used.
Give us the length and give us the dimensions of this stone.
I think this is 72 feet long, and I think that's more or less 14 or 15 feet square. It's not the only one, however, and one of the new things that we discovered was that over the hill, not found in any books or any websites, there was another block approximately the same size, and we're going to show that here now. This is actually, you know, a few hundred yards away to the north, and there it is.
And it's been cut up a little bit by people.
Yeah, there was a little bit of it looks like they might have been attempting to you know,
take some of the granite,
carve it up into smaller pieces or whatever.
Make some bricks.
It's cyclopean, just like the other one.
Wow, that is huge.
And very remarkable, yeah. So the question is, why would people build with such large building materials that would seemingly be so illogical to use, given the size and the magnitude of what it would take to move them? The gravitational forces alone on such objects would seemingly preclude them getting it over there in one piece without killing anybody in the process. And yet, not only did they do it, they did it with expert precision when they placed them in there. That's what's remarkable, and so that's the anomaly we want to deal with. Now, so maybe I should skip ahead to a precedent as we come back here. And the precedent is that in the 40s and 50s in this country in Florida, there was an immigrant from Latvia, a man named Edward Leedskalnin. And he built what is known to this day now, currently being preserved in Florida by the state as a heritage site, what's called the Coral Castle. And it was basically a large residence that he built entirely on his own. And it was very well documented, irrefutably, without any doubt, and known by government officials, because it's said in a recent book that came out that addressed his situation at length, in a chapter devoted to his work, that the United States government actually visited him to find out how he could construct a rather large building, all composed of They're again very, very large blocks weighing several tons each. And he did it entirely alone, without the help of work gangs, assistants, cranes, or any machinery to help him maneuver these blocks after he quarried them himself. Basically, the building material was a kind of coral, which is in the area. And
how heavy is coral? Coral's not as heavy as granite, though, is it?
No, but, well, it can be if their pieces are large enough. And the largest piece in his construction was 30 tons. Another one was 20 tons. The average, I guess, was maybe 1 or 2 tons. But this place is now being protected by the state of Florida. And in the brochure, which I saw a brochure that you can get there, it actually makes it perfectly clear that the anomalous thing about his work was that he was able to move seemingly impossibly large blocks all by himself with precision, and constructed this residential, well, this little castle that he created. Now, the principle is that if Edward Leeds-Callan could do what apparently people did in the past, seemingly by unknown means, which he would never reveal till his death, perhaps he was right when it is now quoted by him as saying, he was quoted as saying that he figured out how they built the Great Pyramid, because one of the anomalies of the Great Pyramid, which we will address in the second part of our program, or large blocks there, just like you just saw at Baalbek, were done in some anomalous way. Now, the Orthodox view is that it wasn't done by anomalous means or paranormal means or anything else. It was just basically done by grunt
Lots
work.
of slaves and a bunch of little pulleys.
Yeah, exactly. And that's all very romantic and seemingly logical and rational.
So you try and do it as an experiment.
Except,
right.
Fortunately, we have this situation with Mr. Leeds-Callan, who obviously did employ anomalous means. So there's no reason why we, as modern people, should not take that as a precedent and say, you know, it may be worthwhile to look into this to see exactly how he did the impossible, because it wasn't possible for one man to move blocks that weighed 20, 30 tons all by themselves. And when you look, and when you go to Baalbek and you see blocks that weigh over 1,000 or 1,100 tons and are placed over 20 feet in the air with precision, maybe that's how they did it. And so basically, this is the kind of thing that motivates a lot of people who are going into various areas, such as Stonehenge, such as places in Peru, Tiwanaku, and perhaps even the pyramids in Central America as well. That something was known by the ancient peoples that actually makes them not primitive people. In some way, they may be comparatively primitive in more cultural ways, but in terms of technology, what they knew about astronomy, various things like that, they apparently were much more sophisticated than even we are today.
What's the conjecture about how this, what's his name, this Finn?
Latvian. Mr. Leeds-Callan. Basically, he actually published a few monographs, or one in particular that I know of, and a few other little small articles, that he had a theory of relativity, shall we say, about the nature of matter itself. And that apparently led him to the realization that he came to, that you can maneuver matter if you understand more about the nature of its quantum properties. In other words, the magnetic properties of the atoms, the structural atomic essence of any given material. And if you understand enough about that, you can in some way alter it to such a way that it can be maneuvered as if it didn't weigh as much as it did, and therefore in some way, shall we say, violate the forces of gravity. But perhaps gravity is not what we think.
Well, you know, when I was at Brown, there was a graduate student that I ran around with for a while, a crazy guy, and he was really into Tibet. And he was convinced that you could get a group, now you're talking about one man, he was convinced that you could get a group of people and take a tone. And with a tone, you could actually come by a tone to the tone of this mass. So if you got your tone of monks, you know, and you keep working on the tone of that mass, that when you hit the tone of the mass's gravity is released for a moment, and it's like a balloon, and they would just float these things up. He was convinced of this, and it was very interesting to talk with him, because it is a very captivating idea that, that the mind itself is in fact the most powerful tool on the planet.
Right, as in the aphorism, mind over matter. Well, I've heard that theory specifically related to the situation you just described myself. And as a matter of fact, there's no reason why not to consider that as a serious possibility, because science, in the orthodox sense, has in fact been pursuing the paranormal. And they don't highly publicize the fact that they have been researching it, but they have for actually quite a few decades now. And the truth is that the term mind over matter is not an overestimation of the possibility that those people, and we're talking about Tibetan monks who are rather adept at what would be very remarkable feats of the control of the mind, you know, in conjunction with control and understanding of the spirit more. And it's perfectly within the realm of possibility. Now, for the rational skeptic, since they haven't seen it done, then they would be inclined to not even to consider it as a possibility. But what I'm saying is that the revisionist historians that are coming up and making their mark now in more or less revising and redefining the history that we've known, they are open-minded enough to consider such things in light of the type of thing that we see at Baalbek, in light of the thing that we see at on the Giza Plateau.
Let me get it this way. A lot of people in the marginal community that goes to these expos and things that we all love to get all of our knowledge about a lot of things that are kind of crazy, but some of them are obviously probably going to be true. The question is, since we have this character who did this, this would kind of take the pressure off us looking at an extraterrestrial. But it could bring us to a group of men, or like just before we started the show, I was talking about in the Bible, Abraham at the the beginning when he first was separating himself from the rest of the tribe and starting his own belief in God in his own little tribe of Judea, he went to a place to have a meeting with these giants. Huge men, of which finally David and Goliath is probably one of the remnant stories of this group of men. The question would be, and we're running out of time in for this part, but could it also have been that it was a group of people who, for one reason or another, they're not recorded in history, but we have whispers of them in the Bible, and we have whispers of them in Chaldea, and we have some whispers of this group of people in Egyptology?
Well, as a matter of fact, in this same book that I quoted earlier by the former curator at Baalbek for 37 years, he actually quotes one of the other traditions that actually also names the giants that you're referring to, that figured prominently in the, shall we say, the oral traditional history, according to various peoples in the area, that includes them within the tradition. And so what we're trying to say is that we shouldn't disregard this term. Now, perhaps giants is a metaphorical thing for a level of intelligence in beings or people that would be seemingly anti-evolutionary in the sense that perhaps people were more evolved in various levels of human potential than we would have expected based on the mechanical model of, you know, apes becoming human-like and then becoming human, and then we make a great leap and we have this great intellectual capacity. Really what the revisionist history is suggesting is that actually the potential for human development has exceeded where we are today, but many thousands of years into the past.
Yes, and let's take this as the next step to the next show.
Okay.
And we looked at what was a temple at Baalbek, Baal being one of the gods of the sun and the wind, and played a very real part in the Old Testament as well. As they worshiped Baal when Moses came back down, and now we have this temple in Lebanon that we've looked at, these huge stones of
1,100 tons.
1,100 tons. And in our next show, we're going to move now to Egypt and follow Randy Kopang and his wild escapade into the mysteries of the past. and we're today going to be discussing Egypt. So, Randy, continue your interesting saga, your tale of questing how ancient man moved great stones.
Thank you, Spencer. Yes, where we're going to begin at this leg of the journey, actually right after we left Lebanon, or Baalbek in Lebanon, we flew directly to Cairo. And a friend of mine, Larry Hunter, who I went there, who has been there very many times, who's an amateur Egyptologist, we hooked up with some friends of his and went to a number of sites. I believe the footage that you will initially see will be that of Giza. The very first scene, in fact, will be a scene, basically just one small segment of the Great Pyramid at Giza. And I thought I'd open up with that image so you can get an idea of the average size of the blocks that were used in the Great Pyramid, the largest pyramid. And they average supposedly around 2.5 or so tons. And I wanted the audience to have a memory there of what that average size block would be compared to many others that you'll see in the ensuing few scenes, wherein the blocks are many, many times larger than that.
Now, some of them are on the Sphinx, right?
Well, no, not actually on the Sphinx. They're near by the Sphinx, adjacent to the Sphinx. And actually, a number of them are, I believe, near what has been identified as a mortuary temple in front of the second pyramid.
Yes. And the other thing we're going to be looking at is looking at the theory that so many people advanced. Well, they had these tools and they have enough slaves that these little copper tools, they could carve these rocks. And we're going to have a roll-in of an expert showing how the copper tools that they have in the Egyptology
Cairo
Museum, excuse me. In the museum, these tools just look pretty futile compared to the rocks. So there's this big, and yet everybody's, oh, you get 80 million slaves, some of them Jews, white little Jews, and they're going to make these rocks. I don't buy it. So we're going to see that. Should we roll it in now and talk over it, or you have more prep?
Well, let me introduce that portion of the footage in the sense that you're not going to know who that is unless I kind of prepare you for now. The person that you will see, kind of interjected in the footage that I brought, is from a presentation given by one of these revisionist authors that I referred to in the first program. These numerous people who are writing this alternative, shall we say, hypothesis on the ancient history. And his name is Christopher Dunn. And his book is titled The Giza Power Plant. It's been out for about a year. And he is a 30-year engineer and machinist who is applying his knowledge to the evidence in Egypt, around the pyramid and at many other sites throughout Egypt, in fact, that shows the signs of not actually handwork done with seemingly primitive tools that are limited to copper. But actually he shows unequivocally in some cases that there was obviously some kind of more highly developed technology well in advance of the ancient primitive means of people who were doing this basically 3,000–4,000 years ago. And therefore, my contention is that that's anti-evolutionary, at least in terms of the evolution of technology. If we consider what we are doing today with all this technology here making this show, is the end of an evolving, sophisticated process. So how could it be that 3,000 or 4,000 years ago they had what apparently seems to be some type of machinery?
I like that term, anti-evolutionary, because what you're saying is, like, here we have the history of everything, and right in the middle of the lizards is a mammal. How did that happen, Well, these lizards were pretty smart. A couple of them got in the sun, got hot-blooded. So you're saying that really, to have this kind of really fine stonework is actually anomalous to the whole accepted pattern of the tools and the trade skills that we can identify through the other archaeological evidence. Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, it's totally contradictory and therefore seemingly anomalous that we would have evidence that does not, it's not consistent, it's incongruent, it doesn't seem to fit in the sense of presuming that technologically the Egyptians, actually it would be more accurate to call them the Cometians, because Egypt was only called Egypt by the Greeks. The term for Egypt is actually called Kemet, and it would be more accurately to call them Cometians. that they were primitives in terms of technology.
I mean, the pharaohs themselves were calling themselves commissions. They weren't saying,
Yeah.
"I am an Egyptian pharaoh. I'm a commission pharaoh."
Yes,
Now that's
they
you know
did.
that just blows my
They did.
mind because I think I took some pretty good history classes. No one brought that out.
No, of course not. But you see, this is the way knowledge is filtered.
Yeah.
By only giving you one variation on an approach to identify a people and what they were like. It's basically it becomes a knowledge filter, and it's a bias, and that's what the revisionists are trying to basically counter. And there's no reason why not to, because we're trying to be fair and unbiased in the sense that, hey, listen, there's obviously questions here. No one has answered all the questions. Hardly, in fact, they've basically, well, to quote I.E. Edwards, here I'll even read this. I.E. Edwards was one of the most renowned, famous expert in the Orthodox sense in pyramidology and Egyptology, and he was the curator of the Egyptian collection at the London Museum for many years. He's now deceased. But in his book, Pyramids of Egypt, he said, I will quote, "It must be admitted that pyramid construction is a subject on which the last word has certainly not yet been written," and that's the whole point why we're here.
All right, well, let's go to this tape then. I want to say there's an easier way to say this. In the words of Joe Friday and Dragnet, we, the revisionists, we are just interested in the facts, ma'am. Just the facts.
Just the facts.
Okay, and these facts are being covered up. All right,
Okay.
let's start. Giza
Now there you
Block.
go. That's the average block at the Great Pyramid right there. And you can see that they're a good size and therefore difficult to move around. But Mr. Leedskalnin, as we referred in the first program, must have figured it out, because he said he did figure that out, how they move them into place, because he did it himself. Now those blocks there are estimated to be in the hundreds of tons. Exactly how much we don't know, but from left to right, that's one block there. That's in front of the second pyramid. This is also nearby that one that you just saw, in I believe what they call some kind of a mortuary temple or whatever, in front of the second pyramid. That whole scene was one block. Here are a couple of blocks. They're very, very large. This is just a more series of large blocks that we're showing comparatively.
This kind of rough masonry hewn
Yeah,
stuff.
this is the end of one, kind of the width, and in a minute you'll see that's how long that block is. That's probably one of the ones that they estimated to be 200 tons. Those are rather large. Those are limestone.
Limestone.
Now here are the tools.
Okay, this is what we want
And
to
these are in
freeze.
the Cairo Museum.
Yeah.
They're made out entirely of copper, and you can see that they're rather seemingly primitive and simple.
Simple. These are the tools that made the pyramid in the Cairo Museum.
So Christopher Dunn will actually demonstrate in a moment, as we show him, demonstrate what it will be like to use a copper chisel when applied to a piece of granite. That's actually what he was going to demonstrate
The
here.
use of copper chisels that have been actually hardened by hammering or work hardened. And I brought with me today a copper chisel and also a piece of granite. If you don't mind, I can.
Please.
I would have you hold this. They confiscated I have a brand new ball-peen hammer. They confiscated my hammer at the airport. They will not allow
The age of
hammers through the
terrorism.
airport now. So I guess I'm going to have to leave this behind too. The corner is generally the weak area. This chisel was created for me by a fellow by the name of Bill Cronkite at Danville Metal Stamping. And so I'm going to attack this corner with the copper.
You go, guy.
Next chisel. If you could focus in on the edge of the chisel, you can see that it's been damaged. I was able to break off a little bit. That is probably more the result of the granite being embedded in the copper than actually the copper itself. But to actually go to it and create those artifacts using a copper chisel is impossible.
And that's what the Egyptologists basically have asked us to believe. Is that correct? That the tools of which they show in the museums in Cairo are basically this particular technique you just showed us.
That's what you'll read in a book on Egyptology if it's written by certain Egyptologists, yes.
Wow, isn't that amazing?
Mhm.
This is something, you know, because I remember they get you young, you know. I can remember being very young in school, and the teacher says, "These are the pyramids." Imagine they show all these little pictures, all these little workers, you know, they're all like chiseling away, and it doesn't work.
Well, in point of clarification, the copper tools, I'm sure, were effective in cutting limestone, which is extremely soft compared to granite. But if you look on what they call the Mohs scale of the hardness of materials, copper, even hardened copper, which the Egyptologists say they developed some method to harden it by tempering it or whatever, and even I.E. Edwards, who I just quoted, says in his book that they haven't found any evidence of how that could have been done. He said that. But in any case, they say that maybe they hardened it and made it a little bit harder, and so therefore, you know, then they could do better work with it. But the truth is that on the Mohs scale, copper, hardened or otherwise, is about half as hard as granite. So it makes no logical sense that they could do precision, the type of work that you will see continuing here. And so as we continue in the roll-on, you'll see some of the precision work that we're talking about. Okay, now we're beginning to get into the issue of the granite, and you'll see the arrow is pointing to what they call a blend radius between the perpendicular sides. Now, we'll give some much better examples than that, but the mere fact that there's a contour there in between the two angles. Here is a much better example of that. And you can see the arc, the way the piece is arced over.
Yes.
Well, Mr. Dunn took some calibration devices to Egypt. This is a better angle of that same piece that weighs a number of tons, actually, this piece of granite. It's pink granite. And notice that the contours in the blend radius there in the corners, and then the radiuses of the curve itself are absolutely uniformly, precisely parallel and contoured in basically 3 axes, X, Y, and Z axes. And his conclusion was that in no way could have been done by hand with copper chisels. Now here's a better contour. I photographed that photograph, and I'm here to tell you that those curves are absolutely uniform, just like they had some kind of a router or something that went right through it and cut it. And the uniformity is a function of the device used, not that it was done by hand. Handwork can't be done like that. It's too irregular and too imperfect to create such uniform parallel surfaces. Here's some more of the blocks, very large blocks. These are also at Giza. And now we're going to go to another site to show more of the evidence of machining. And this will be a site that's about 10 kilometers or so south of Giza, where the pyramids are. And this is the site of Abu Sir. And there are 3 of the pyramids that are at this area, circa 2490 BC. That's the hypothetical time that they believe all this took place. However, the revisionist view is that actually the temples associated with these pyramids were there long in advance of when they were utilized by the pharaohs in perhaps the 5th dynasty.
Now, is this another anti-evolutionary thing, or are these actually younger?
This is the beginning of a series of photographs. Here you see some more that show absolute evidence of boring. Now, the conventional view is that they did have drills. The problem, though, is that they've never found any drills.
Well, there's no evidence of drills in any
So
of these
obviously
digs.
what we're showing is that they did have evidence of drills, but they never found any. Really all they ever found were copper chisels and some kind of like hammer devices.
There, yes.
But that's a rather large one. But the most impressive holes are right here in this shot, and some close-ups we have to show the scoring on the inside of the holes at the radius. Here's even more. Those holes are about 2 or 3 inches in diameter, and they're absolutely perfect holes. That material there was basalt. This is just, and here's another one.
Wow. This is really, you had a good cameraman. This is very good contrast here to see the different styles of...
Yeah, now here we have an example of this. As you can see, that's a perfect hole. And you can see little lines on the inside that are due to the scoring of the drill bit.
Well, how do Egyptologists of the conventional Orthodox view explain these holes if you have no evidence of the tool?
You can see the scoring on the inside.
I see the scoring.
Right, of the rotation. And actually, an unusual thing about the boring device that they used, and that material there you see is basalt. It's approximately the same hardness as granite. The types of drills that they used were actually hollow drills. They were actually tube drills, which was even more remarkable, presuming that they used copper drills, because they would be seemingly even weaker than if the drill was a conventional drill, as someone imagines a drill in their mind. These drills were hollow, so that it left a cylinder that had to be broken off after the drill went down.
Do we use diamond bits to do that now? I mean,
yeah.
Can they
Well,
do that with steel?
we would use basically something that would be called silicon carbide, or perhaps with diamond tips on the drills to cut through that type of hardness of material. Yes, and of course you can imagine. Well, they must have had the technology to affix precious stones to the material of the copper if the drills were made out of copper. The whole thing is illogical. Now here's a copper lid. This has been addressed.
What lid?
A copper lid, basically.
A coffin.
Your coffin lid.
Yeah.
Copper lid.
Sarcophagus.
Yeah.
Okay. Wow.
Here's a shot of the facing stones that are the type of thing that are now missing from the 3 Great Pyramids, but this shows you what they would have looked like if they were still there. They've been removed.
Because they were too valuable?
Yeah, they removed them to use them as a building material.
They were marble rather than granite, is that right?
Not quite marble, but close to it.
Now, how did they cut those stones right there? Is that sandstone?
Well, there's no telling. Those are made out of red granite.
Jeez.
It's hard to tell how they did it.
And we have just those little copper tools and 100 little slaves.
Well, I might say though that there was a man in 1837 named J.R. Hill who found a piece of iron embedded in the Great Pyramid and sent it to the Cairo Museum, and it still exists there. It's the only piece of iron that was ever found that was absolutely irrefutably shown to be a part of the site where it was found, so they couldn't presume it was placed there later after the ability to make iron was developed. But actually, where Mr. Hill found it in 1837, it was emplaced between some of the blocks, I believe somewhere in the Great Pyramid, and therefore must have been there when the pyramid was constructed, and they didn't refute that. However, they don't make a big deal about it because, of course, the primary classic pyramid age, which was in the Old Kingdom of the dynastic period, which was divided into an Old Kingdom and a New Kingdom. The Old Kingdom ended around the 5th dynasty, and that's around, 2400 BC. Now, they ostensibly didn't have the ability to smelt iron or create iron. So when Mr. Hill found the piece of iron, they took it and they cataloged it, and then they just set it aside and forgot about it until recently some people went there and said, hey, listen, we know that they found it. A very renowned Egyptologist noted it in one of his books, and that's how they had evidence for it, and so they went there to see it for themselves, and it does exist. But they don't claim it has any place in history because, of course, it doesn't fit into history. So what I'm saying is that the find shows that obviously they must have had some kind of materials harder than copper, and that at least shows that in one instance it shows they must have had something harder, namely iron. But they haven't found really anything other than that, so it's an anomaly. So Mr. Dunn hypothesizes, with a great body of evidence, much greater than we've even referred to here. I mean, it goes on and on. We don't have time to discuss it. And it's over and above simply drilling techniques or the cutting and placing of precision-placed blocks that weigh 70 tons in the Great Pyramid, or these contoured pieces. It goes on beyond that too. But in any case, the point is that Mr. Dunn makes a case for this in the sense that you can very clearly see evidence of some kind of machining in various ways, not only drilling, the sawing of great pieces of granite, where in the book he shows that the grooves in the granite were left from the device that was used to saw the ends of certain things. And it must have been a machine that worked at high speed, because if you were going at a slow pace by hand, you would see that, oh, we're getting a little bit off, let's stop. But anybody who has the experience of like a skill saw or whatever, that kind of analogy, you know that when you start to go off, you miss it quite a bit, and you have to come back because the blade is rotating so fast. And so it's difficult to get it back online, and to avoid going further, you almost can't because of the momentum of the machine, and that's the kind of evidence he's found to show that it wasn't done by handwork. It must have been done by some kind of a machine, wherein the cutting process was being done rapidly, much more rapidly than could possibly have been done by hand. Now, another problem is the pressures involved. When you're working on these materials like granite and diorite and basalt, the pressures that would have been involved to drill holes that are that big around would be extremely large in terms of pressures to bear down. How could a man, a single man, bear many, I mean, God knows how many thousands of pounds per square inch to get it to go through there? See, these are the anomalies that we're talking about. Okay, now we're going to go on to our last piece of film, I believe, and that is Abu Ghraib. And this is a very remarkable place, one of the most remarkable, because you're going to see also evidence of the tube drill phenomenon. And right before you there, right there in the middle of the screen, is an altar, as they call it. This is an example of the same kind of material in a pavement or a podium that is this whole area was paved with. Now it's broken off. You can see the podium around it.
Yeah.
That whole area apparently was paved with that same material at one time, and that material is basically solid crystal alabaster. It's about as hard as quartz, I believe. And this circle that you'll see right here shows the irrefutable evidence of how they contoured this portion of this altar. You will see us freeze frame this in a second. And there again, it was evidence that they had this kind of hollow drill technology that drilled down in the corner and left these circles there and to the left and then to the left again. You'll see the radius of the cutting device that was used. So they drilled it down like in successive places to remove the material. And there you can very clearly see it. That was not left by a copper chisel.
Yeah, but I have a question. You know, if you drill down like this, you still have to cut across to get that, you know, I mean, you can't just...
They did it successively. You see the radius next to each? See, there's another one next to the other one on the right.
Yeah.
See what they did? They went like, they did one, then they moved over the approximate radius, and then or diameter, and then they did another one, and then they did another one. That's the way they did it. Then they had some method of polishing. See, there's another.
They had to have some method of breaking it off at the bottom.
You see there? There's another scarring.
Or cutting it at the bottom.
Yeah.
Because even though you make all those little can cuts, now we've got about 3 minutes here to go. How much longer we got on the tape here?
Just probably a couple more minutes.
Okay, because we have a sample of that.
Yeah, we're going to show a sample of that material. I brought it back.
That he got at the site. And the whole, imagine a whole, how large an area would you say was made out of this crystal?
Well, this
originally?
This altar is about 4 feet high and about, I don't know, maybe 9 or 10 feet in diameter. It's solid, 100% solid, as you can see.
Wow.
They say that it's alabaster. In any case, it's some kind of solid crystal, extremely hard. I would say even harder than granite, which is almost entirely quartz. But it's remarkable that they got this material, and then they used the same material as a pavement upon which to place this altar. Yeah. So there again, they had extremely hard material to deal with.
Where did they quarry this stuff?
I don't know. I've never heard any references to where the quarry was.
Okay. Well, we're now only down to 1 minute, so we should probably fade from the roll-on now so we can show the stone that we actually have.
Yeah, we have a piece of this.
So Tim, if we come here, here is the stone. They actually had that something would be 4 feet. See all the little veins in it, and that it would be a larger. That's a small piece that had fallen off, was lying on the ground, and we're going to conclude with, imagine how they were able to cut that with devices that we still don't understand how they do it. And let's conclude the show with, that's why we called this the anomalies. There are situations in these temples and their construction which are so unique and so different that we still don't know how, from the evidence that we have now in archaeology, how they did these things, and how they did them is a mystery. And we would appreciate if the historians, instead of not glossing over the facts, would meet these facts head on so we could have a greater understanding of the kind of human accomplishment and achievement that was truly done in ancient times. And Randy, I got to really thank you for coming on the show with this amazing video that you did and that amazing journey you made to Lebanon and to Egypt. And really thank you very
Sven,
much.
for
It was
inviting
really a
me.
great adventure. And stay tuned. We'll have more adventure with Randy to come, I'm sure. He'll be off on another adventure soon.
That's right. Thank you.